Claire Donovan stood in the cramped living room of her tiny apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. She was only 22, but life had already weighed her down with burdens most people never faced. Her mother, Ellen Donovan, lay in a hospital bed across town, her heart failing more each day. The doctors had been blunt. Without a surgery costing $200,000, Ellen would not survive the month. Claire clutched her phone, scrolling through job listings that offered nowhere near enough to save her mother. She felt trapped, suffocating under the pressure of poverty. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of a cheap fan. Claire's hazel eyes, usually bright with determination, were red from sleepless nights. She wore a threadbare sweater, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her hands trembled as she opened a browser tab she had avoided for days. It was an ad she had stumbled across on a shady website. A wealthy man needed someone to marry him, no strings attached, just a signature on paper. The reward was a lump sum, enough to cover Ellen's surgery. Claire hesitated, her stomach twisting at the thought. She had always prided herself on her independence, but now pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. That afternoon, Claire took a bus downtown, her heart pounding as she stepped into a dingy coffee shop. The place smelled of burnt espresso and grease. She spotted him immediately, a tall man in a tailored coat sitting at a corner table. His name was Daniel Reynolds, though she would soon call him Dan. He had sharp features, dark hair, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He looked out of place in the grimy setting, like a polished diamond in a pile of coal. Claire approached, her voice shaky as she introduced herself. Dan barely glanced up from his coffee. He explained the deal in a clipped tone. His mother, Dorothy, was dying and refused surgery unless he proved he was married. He needed a wife on paper, nothing more. In return, he would pay Claire $200,000. Claire swallowed hard, her mind racing. She asked how long they would need to stay married. Dan said 1 year, then they would divorce quietly. No contact, no complications. She stared at the table, tracing a scratch in the wood with her finger. This was not how she imagined her life, selling her name to a stranger. But Ellen's face flashed in her mind, pale and fragile, hooked to machines. Claire nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she agreed. Dan slid a contract across the table. She signed it without reading the fine print, her hand shaking. He handed her a check for the full amount, not even blinking as he did. Within 10 minutes, they walked to the city hall 2 blocks away. A bored clerk stamped their marriage license, and just like that, Claire Donovan became Claire Reynolds. Back at the apartment, Claire sat alone, the check clutched in her hands. She felt a strange mix of relief and shame. The money would save Ellen, but at what cost? She thought of Dan, his cold demeanor, his expensive coat. He had not even asked her last name before the deal was done. She wondered who he really was. This man who could throw around hundreds of thousands like it was pocket change. Claire shoved the check into a drawer and grabbed her coat. She needed to get to the hospital, to see her mother, to remind herself why she had done this. The hospital was a maze of white walls and antiseptic smells. Claire found Ellen's room and slipped inside. Her mother looked small under the thin blanket, her breathing shallow. Tubes ran from her arms to machines that beeped steadily. Claire sank into a chair beside the bed, tears spilling down her cheeks. She took Ellen's hand, feeling the frail bones beneath the skin. Ellen stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She smiled weakly and asked why Claire was crying. Claire forced a smile, saying it was nothing, just tired from work. She could not bring herself to tell the truth, that she had just married a stranger to pay for this bed, these machines, this chance at life. Ellen squeezed Claire's hand, her voice raspy as she told her daughter to rest. Claire nodded, but rest was the last thing on her mind. She thought of the marriage license tucked in her bag, a piece of paper that tied her to a man she did not know. Dan had said it was simple, just business. But as she sat there, watching her mother drift back to sleep, Claire felt a knot in her chest. She had crossed a line she could not uncross. The money was real, the marriage was legal, and now her life was tangled with the strangers in ways she could not predict. Claire stayed until a nurse ushered her out. She walked home through the cold Chicago night, the city lights blurring through her tears. The check in her drawer was her lifeline, but it came with a weight she could not shake. She wondered if Dan felt anything at all, or if he saw her as just another transaction. Back in her apartment, she stood by the window, staring at the dark skyline. She whispered to herself that this was for Ellen, that she had no choice, but deep down, she feared what this decision would cost her, not just today, but in the year to come. Claire Donovan woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the chipped nightstand. The morning light filtered through the cracked blinds of her Chicago apartment, casting thin shadows across the room. It had been 2 weeks since she signed that marriage contract with Daniel Reynolds, or Dan, as she now thought of him. The check for $200,000 had cleared, and Ellen's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow. Claire felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months, but it came with a restlessness she could not shake. She wanted more than just survival. She wanted a chance to build something for herself. At the hospital, Claire sat by Ellen's bedside, watching her mother sleep. The machines beeped steadily, a reminder of the lifeline that money had bought. Ellen looked better already, her cheeks less pale. A nurse stopped by and said the surgery would go ahead as planned. Claire smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. When Ellen woke, she asked about the money, her voice weak but curious. Claire lied smoothly, saying she had landed a freelance gig that paid well. Ellen nodded, too tired to press further. Claire hated lying, but the truth felt too heavy to share. Back home, Claire opened her laptop and scrolled through job listings. She had dropped out of community college after one semester, unable to afford it. Her resume was thin, just a string of minimum-wage jobs at diners and gas stations. But then she saw it. An opening for a management trainee at Reynolds Tech, a huge tech firm downtown. The ad asked for a degree, which she lacked, but Claire felt a strange pull. She remembered Dan's name from the contract, though she had no idea he ran the company. On a whim, she typed up an application, pouring her heart into a cover letter about her grit and determination. She hit send and crossed her fingers. Days later, Claire got a call from a woman named Dorothy Reynolds. Her voice was warm but firm, like a grandmother who took no nonsense. Dorothy said she had seen Claire's application and wanted to meet. Claire was stunned. She took the bus to Reynolds Tech's gleaming headquarters, a tower of glass and steel that dwarfed the city around it. Inside, the lobby buzzed with sharply dressed employees. Claire felt out of place in her faded jeans and sneakers, but she straightened her shoulders and walked to the reception desk. A young man led her to an office on the 30th floor, where Dorothy waited. Dorothy was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She wore a navy blazer and a string of pearls, exuding quiet authority. She gestured for Claire to sit and got straight to the point. She liked Claire's application, degree or not. She said Reynolds Tech needed people with real-world experience, not just book smarts. Claire blinked, unsure if this was a trick. Dorothy smiled and added that she had a soft spot for underdogs. Before Claire could process it, Dorothy offered her the trainee position, starting next week. Claire stammered, a thank you, her mind spinning as she left the office. She had no idea Dorothy was Dan's grandmother, pulling strings behind the scenes. Claire's first day at Reynolds Tech was a whirlwind. She arrived early, clutching a cheap notebook and a pen. The trainee program paired her with a team of polished graduates, all with degrees from big-name schools. Claire felt their stares, their whispered judgments about her lack of credentials. Her supervisor, Rachel Bennett, was a tall woman with a tight smile and cold eyes. Rachel assigned Claire a stack of data entry tasks, her tone dripping with condescension. Another coworker, Jake Sullivan, smirked as he passed by, muttering something about charity cases. Claire gritted her teeth and got to work, determined to prove them wrong. The days turned into weeks, and Claire threw herself into the job. She stayed late, poring over spreadsheets and learning the company's systems. Her hands flew across the keyboard, her focus unbreakable. She started noticing patterns in the data, small inefficiencies no one else caught. One evening, She typed up a report with suggestions and left it on Rachel's desk. The next morning, Rachel called her over, her face a mask of irritation. She said Claire's ideas were solid and had been passed up to the boss. Claire felt a rush of pride, but Rachel quickly added that she should not get cocky. That boss was Dan Reynolds, though Claire still did not connect him to the man from the coffee shop. She saw him sometimes, striding through the office in a crisp suit, his presence commanding. He rarely spoke to the trainees, his attention fixed on bigger things. Claire admired him from afar, drawn to his quiet intensity. She had no clue he was her legal husband, the one who had handed her that life-changing check. Dan, for his part, barely noticed the new trainee with the dark hair and determined eyes. His days were a blur of meetings and deals, his mind far from that quick marriage he had arranged. Trouble started brewing soon enough. Rachel and Jake grew jealous of Claire's knack for standing out. One afternoon, Claire found a company pen missing from her desk. The next day, Jake waved it in her face, claiming she had stolen it. Rachel backed him up, her voice loud enough for the whole team to hear. Claire's cheeks burned as she denied it, but the accusation stuck. She overheard whispers in the break room, words like thief and dropout cutting deep. She wanted to quit, to run back to her old life, but she thought of Ellen recovering at home. She had to keep going. Claire fought back the only way she knew how, with hard work. She doubled down, volunteering for extra tasks and staying late to finish them. She taught herself the company's software, her fingers aching from hours of typing. One night, as she packed up, Dorothy appeared at her desk. The older woman had been watching, she said, and liked what she saw. She told Claire to keep her head up, that she had potential. Claire nodded, grateful for the encouragement. Dorothy's words lit a fire in her, a resolve to prove she belonged. By the end of her first month, Claire had earned a small victory. Rachel grudgingly admitted one of Claire's suggestions had saved the team hours of work. Jake stayed silent, his smirk gone. Claire felt a spark of triumph, but she knew the road ahead was long. She walked home that night, the Chicago wind biting at her face. She thought of Dan, the mysterious CEO she admired, and wondered what he would think if he knew her story. She had no idea how close their lives already were, tied together by a piece of paper neither of them fully remembered. Claire Donovan adjusted her blouse as she stepped into the sleek conference room at Reynolds Tech. 3 months into her trainee role, she had settled into a rhythm, her confidence growing with each task she tackled. The office buzzed with energy, phones ringing and keyboards clacking. She liked the chaos, the sense that she was part of something big. Today was different, though. A company cocktail party loomed that evening, and Claire felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She had heard whispers about Daniel Reynolds, the CEO, attending. She admired him from a distance, his quiet strength pulling her in like a magnet. At her desk, Claire sorted through emails, her focus sharp. Rachel Bennett dropped a stack of files in front of her. Her voice clipped as she ordered Claire to finish them by noon. Claire nodded, used to Rachel's coldness by now. Jake Sullivan lingered nearby, his smirk ever present. He muttered something about her being the office pet, but Claire ignored him. She had learned to tune out the noise to let her work speak for itself. By mid-afternoon, she had caught up and even fixed a typo in a report Rachel had missed. She felt a small thrill of pride, but kept it to herself. The cocktail party was held in a swanky rooftop lounge downtown, the Chicago skyline glittering below. Claire arrived in a simple black dress she had borrowed from a thrift store. She felt out of place among the suits and sequins, but she squared her shoulders and grabbed a glass of water. Dan appeared halfway through the night, his presence shifting the room's energy. He wore a dark suit, his blue eyes scanning the crowd. Claire watched him chat with executives, his voice low and steady. When their eyes met briefly, she felt a jolt, though she brushed it off as nerves. Later, Dan approached her table, a rare occurrence. He asked how she was settling in, his tone casual but genuine. Claire stammered a reply, saying she liked the challenge. He nodded, then pulled a folded shawl from his jacket. He said the rooftop got chilly and handed it to her. Claire took it, her fingers brushing his for a split second. She thanked him, her cheeks warm, and he walked away. The gesture stuck with her, small but thoughtful. That weekend she decided to repay him. She spent hours in her tiny kitchen, frying chicken with a butter glaze, a recipe her mom swore by. On Monday, she left a Tupperware container on his desk with a note that read, "Thanks for the shawl." Trouble brewed at work soon after. Rachel called Claire to her office, her face twisted with anger. She held up a project proposal Claire had submitted, claiming it was stolen from her own work. Jake backed her up, saying he saw Claire snooping around Rachel's desk. Claire's stomach dropped. She explained she had built the proposal from scratch, pulling data from public files. Rachel scoffed, but Claire pulled out her laptop and showed time-stamped drafts she had emailed to Dan each night. Rachel's expression soured, but she had no comeback. Dan reviewed the evidence later and praised Claire's diligence, leaving Rachel fuming. The real test came a week later. Dan needed a team to seal a $100 million deal with a tough client, a tech supplier from Texas. The meeting was set at a downtown steakhouse, all polished wood and dim lighting. Claire volunteered, eager to prove herself. The client, a burly man named Hank, liked to negotiate over drinks. Dan warned the team he could not drink due to an allergy, so Claire stepped up. When Hank poured a round of bourbon, Claire grabbed Dan's glass and downed it in one go. The room went quiet. Then Hank laughed, impressed. 3 glasses later, the deal was signed. But Claire's head spun. Dan noticed her swaying as they left the restaurant. He insisted on driving her home, but Claire mumbled she could not remember her address. The bourbon had hit hard, her thoughts a jumble. Dan sighed and took her to his penthouse instead, a sleek space high above the city. He helped her to the couch, her steps unsteady. Claire slumped down, her eyes half closed. In her haze, she heard his voice, deep and familiar. It tugged at a memory, the coffee shop, the contract. She murmured his name, Dan, and reached for him, her arms wrapping around his neck. She thought he was the man from that day, the one who had saved her mother. Dan froze, caught off guard. Claire's touch was warm, her breath soft against his cheek. For a moment he did not pull away. The room felt still, the city lights glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Claire's hand slipped and she leaned closer, her lips brushing his jaw. Dan's resolve wavered. He could have stopped it, but something in her vulnerability, her trust, held him there. The moment stretched, unspoken, until he gently guided her back to the couch. He pulled the curtains shut, the room darkening as he stepped away. Claire drifted off, unaware of the line they had nearly crossed. Morning light woke Claire, harsh and unforgiving. She blinked, realizing she was not home. She wore Dan's oversized dress shirt, her dress folded neatly nearby. Panic surged through her. She scrambled up, finding Dan in the kitchen, sipping coffee. He looked calm, his suit replaced by a plain sweater. Claire asked what happened, her voice trembling. Dan met her gaze and said she had been too drunk to go home, so he brought her here. He added firmly that he had not taken advantage of her, that she had slept on the couch. Claire nodded, relief mixing with confusion. She remembered reaching for him, the warmth of his skin, but said nothing. Dan drove her home in silence, the city waking up around them. Claire stared out the window, her mind racing. She thanked him as she stepped out, her voice small. Dan watched her go, his hands tight on the wheel. Back at his penthouse, he stood by the window, replaying the night. Claire's touch lingered in his mind, stirring something he could not name. He had always kept people at arm's length, but she was different. He wondered why she felt so familiar, why her presence unsettled him. At her apartment, Claire sank onto her bed, the borrowed shirt still carrying his scent. She felt a pull toward him, a connection she could not explain. Work grew tense after that. Rachel and Jake doubled down, spreading rumors that Claire was cozying up to the boss. Claire overheard them in the break room, their words sharp. She confronted them, her voice steady as she denied it. Rachel smirked, saying no one believed her. Claire walked away, her fists clenched. She threw herself into her tasks, determined to rise above the gossip. Dan noticed her effort, calling her into his office one day. He said her work stood out, that she had a future here. Claire smiled, grateful, but her heart raced at his closeness. She left quickly, afraid of what she felt. That night, Dan sat alone in his office, the city dark beyond the glass. He pulled Claire's file, scanning her name. Claire Donovan. It nagged at him, a memory just out of reach. He thought of her courage with the bourbon, her quiet strength. He pushed the file aside, his jaw tight. She was just a trainee, he told himself. But as he stared at the skyline, he knew it was more than that. Claire, meanwhile, lay awake, replaying his words. She admired him. Maybe too much. She wondered if he felt anything at all, or if she was just another face in the crowd. Claire Donovan walked through the bustling halls of Reynolds Tech, her heels clicking against the polished floor. 6 months into her trainee role, she had carved out a space for herself, earning nods from colleagues who once dismissed her. The Chicago skyline loomed outside the windows, a constant reminder of how far she had come. She still felt the sting of Rachel Bennett and Jake Sullivan's jealousy, but their barbs mattered less now. Claire had bigger things on her mind, like the upcoming tech conference she had been tapped to help lead. It was a chance to prove herself, and she was not about to let it slip. At her desk, Claire reviewed the conference plans, her notebook filled with scribbled ideas. Daniel Reynolds, the CEO she now called Dan, had taken a more active interest in her work since that night at his penthouse. She tried not to dwell on it, the memory of his shirt on her skin, his steady voice calming her panic. He had kept his distance since, but his praise came more often. Last week he had stopped by her cubicle, saying her latest report was sharp enough to present to the board. Claire had blushed, mumbling a thank you. She felt a pull toward him but pushed it down, focusing on her job. Trouble was brewing beyond the office walls, though Claire did not know it yet. Dan's family was a tangled mess, one he rarely spoke of. His father, George Reynolds, had built Reynolds Tech decades ago, but his personal life was a wreck. Years back, he had an affair, fathering a son named Tyler Reynolds with another woman. Dan had cut ties with George at 18, vowing to make his own way. Tyler, though, stayed close, his resentment festering. Now, with George aging and frail, Tyler saw a chance to claim the family fortune. He slipped into George's mansion one night, lacing his heart pills with a slow-acting poison, his plan cold and calculated. Claire stumbled into this drama by accident. She had been sent to a luxury hotel downtown to pick up conference materials from a supplier. As she waited in the lobby, she overheard Tyler's voice, sharp and low, coming from a corner booth. He was with a man she did not recognize, talking about George's pills and a will that left everything to him. Claire's pulse raced. She ducked behind a potted plant, straining to hear. Tyler laughed, saying the old man would be gone by week's end. Claire fumbled for her phone, texting Dan a vague warning about trouble at the hotel. She did not know the full story, but something told her he needed to know. Dan got the message during a late meeting. He excused himself, his jaw tight as he called Claire. She whispered what she had heard, her voice shaky. Dan told her to stay put and drove across town, his mind racing. He had suspected Tyler's greed, even hiring a private investigator to track him months ago. The PI had flagged odd purchases, chemicals that matched Claire's story. Dan burst into the hotel, finding Claire by the elevators. She pointed to the booth, now empty. They raced to George's mansion, Dan's car cutting through the Chicago night. They found George slumped in his armchair, his breathing shallow. Dan called 911, his hands steady as he checked his father's pulse. Claire stood by, her heart pounding. Paramedics arrived fast, pumping George's stomach and rushing him to the hospital. Dan stayed silent on the drive, his knuckles white on the wheel. Claire wanted to say something, but the weight of the moment held her back. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the poison, saying they had caught it just in time. George would live, though he needed rest. Dan sat by his father's bed, his face unreadable. Claire lingered in the hall, unsure of her place. George woke briefly, gripping Dan's hand, mumbling an apology for years of neglect. Dan nodded, but said nothing. Claire saw the pain in his eyes and slipped away, giving him space. Back at work, Claire's star rose higher. The tech conference was a month away, and Dan put her in charge of the keynote presentation. She spent nights at the office crafting slides and rehearsing lines. Her efforts paid off when Dorothy Reynolds, Dan's grandmother, stopped by to watch a dry run. Dorothy clapped at the end, her smile wide. She said Claire had a gift, that she reminded her of Dan at that age. Claire beamed, the praise fueling her drive. She also started a side project, organizing a donation drive for kids in Appalachia. She coordinated coats and books, her passion shining through. Word spread, and a local magazine nominated her for a Rising Star in Charity Award. Rachel and Jake watched her rise with growing spite. They teamed up with Tyler, who had dodged charges thanks to a slick lawyer. The three hatched a plan to ruin Claire at the charity gala where her award would be announced. Rachel stole Claire's donation receipts from her desk, replacing them with fakes that showed missing funds. Jake spread rumors among the trainees, saying Claire was a fraud. Tyler fed the story to a gossip blog, hinting at a scandal at Reynolds Tech. Claire noticed the tension at work, the sidelong glances, but she could not pin it down. She kept her head high, trusting her work would speak for itself. Dan caught wind of the plot days before the gala. His PI had tapped Tyler's phone, picking up a call where he bragged about framing Claire. Dan called Claire into his office, his voice calm but firm. He asked if she had noticed anything off. Claire mentioned the whispers, the odd looks. Dan showed her the fake receipts, his eyes narrowing as she confirmed they were not hers. He said he believed her, that he had proof Tyler was behind it. Claire felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with something deeper. Dan's trust meant more than she could admit. He told her to focus on the gala, that he would handle the rest. Claire threw herself into the final prep, her nerves jangling. She spent hours at the library rebuilding her donation records from scratch. She contacted schools and shelters in Appalachia, gathering statements to back her up. The night before the gala, she sat in her apartment, staring at the city lights. She thought of Dan, his quiet support, his steady presence. That night at his penthouse flashed in her mind, the warmth of his closeness. She shook it off, telling herself it was just work, but her heart raced at the thought of him, a feeling she could not name. Dan, meanwhile, sat in his office. The PI's report spread across his desk. Tyler's voice echoed in his head, smug and cruel. He thought of Claire, her courage at the hotel, her drive at work. She was more than a trainee to him now, though he fought to keep that buried. He remembered her arms around him that drunken night, the way she had softened against him. He rubbed his temples, pushing the memory aside. The gala would be her moment, he decided. He would make sure Tyler and his cronies failed. As the city hummed below, Dan felt a resolve settle in, a need to protect her he could not ignore. Claire fell asleep on her couch, her laptop open to the keynote slides. She dreamed of the gala, of standing tall, of Dan's blue eyes watching her. She had no idea how close their lives were about to collide, how the night ahead would change everything. Claire Donovan stepped into the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, her heart pounding under the borrowed navy gown she wore. The charity gala buzzed with energy, chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables draped in white linen. She had spent weeks preparing for this night, her Rising Star in Charity nomination a beacon of hope after months of struggle. The room hummed with chatter from business leaders, philanthropists, and reporters, all gathered to honor good deeds. Claire smoothed her dress, feeling the weight of the moment. She had no idea the storm waiting to crash over her. The evening started smoothly. Claire mingled with guests, her smile steady as she answered questions about her work in Appalachia. She spoke of the coats and books she had sent to kids there, her voice carrying a quiet pride. People nodded, impressed by her story, a college dropout turned do-gooder. She spotted Dan across the room, his dark suit sharp against the crowd. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, a gesture that steadied her nerves. She had grown used to his presence, his quiet support a lifeline she did not fully understand. The program began with a sleek MC taking the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. He ran through the night's agenda, building up to the award announcements. Claire sat at a round table near the front, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt a prickle of unease, a sense that eyes were on her. Rachel Bennett and Jake Sullivan sat 2 tables away. their faces tight with something she could not read. She brushed it off, focusing on the MC as he called her name. The room erupted in applause, and Claire stood, her legs shaky as she walked to the podium. She took the microphone, her voice soft but clear. She thanked the magazine for the nomination, then spoke of Reynolds Tech and the chance it had given her. She was mid-sentence when a voice cut through the air. Tyler Reynolds stormed to the front, his face twisted with fury. He shouted that Claire was a fraud, that her charity was a lie. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the room. Rachel joined him, her heels clicking as she climbed the stage. She held up a stack of papers, claiming they were proof Claire had stolen donation funds. Jake followed, his voice loud as he called her a thief who used pity to climb the ranks. Claire froze, the microphone trembling in her hand. She tried to speak, but Tyler drowned her out, saying she and Dan had cooked the books together. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Claire's chest tightened, her mind racing to the missing receipts Rachel had taken. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Rachel waved the fakes, her voice sharp as she asked how a dropout could afford designer pins in her hair. The crowd shifted, doubt creeping into their faces. Claire felt the room spin, her dream crumbling under their lies. Then Dan stepped forward, his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. He climbed the stage, his blue eyes locked on Tyler. The room fell silent, every eye on him. He took the microphone from Claire, his voice steady as he told everyone to listen. He said Claire was no thief, that he had proof of her innocence. He pulled out his phone and played a recording, Tyler's voice crackling through the speaker. It was a call the PI had tapped, Tyler bragging about framing Claire with fake receipts. Gasps filled the air, heads turning to Tyler, whose smirk faded fast. Dan kept going, his tone calm but firm. He said he had hired a private investigator months ago, suspecting Tyler's schemes after the poisoning attempt on George. He handed the MC a folder, full of emails and bank records showing every penny Claire had raised went to Appalachia. Then he called up witnesses. A principal from a mountain school took the stage, her voice warm as she confirmed Claire's donations matched her lists. A shelter director followed, then a relief worker, each one vouching for her. The crowd's mood shifted, applause breaking out as the truth sank in. Claire stood there, her eyes wide, tears pricking at the corners. She looked at Dan, his face set with determination. He turned to her, lowering the microphone, and said something that stopped her breath. He called her his wife, his legal wife, from a marriage a year ago neither of them had fully remembered. The room exploded in whispers, reporters leaning forward. Dan explained, his voice softening. He said they had signed a contract to save their mothers, a deal he had forgotten until her name kept tugging at him. He admitted he had fallen for her, not as a trainee, but as the woman she was, brave and kind. Tyler lunged forward, shouting that Dan was lying, that he deserved the family's wealth. Dan cut him off, saying the PI had tied him to the fake receipts and George's poisoning. Security moved in, grabbing Tyler as he thrashed, his curses echoing. Rachel and Jake tried to slip away, but Dan named them too, their faces pale as guards blocked their path. He said they were under investigation for fraud and defamation. Their careers over. The crowd watched, stunned, as the trio was led out, Tyler yelling apologies that fell flat. Dan handed the microphone back to Claire, his hand brushing hers. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She finished her speech, her voice stronger now. She said she owed everything to Dan, not just for tonight, but for believing in her when no one else did. She called him the real charity star, a man who warmed lives despite his own cold past. The room clapped, a wave of sound washing over her. Dan stood beside her, his expression soft for the first time she could recall. She felt his gaze, a warmth that made her heart race. As the gala wound down, Claire stepped off the stage, her award in hand. Dan followed, pulling her aside near a quiet corner. He said he had meant every word, that he wanted their marriage to be real, not just paper. Claire stared at him, her mind spinning. She remembered that night at his penthouse, the way he had held her, the trust in his eyes now. She nodded, her voice a whisper as she said she felt it too. Dan smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and pulled her close, the crowd fading into the background. The reporters swarmed after, questions flying about their marriage. Claire let Dan handle it, his arm steady around her. He said they had started as strangers but found something real along the way. He asked her to stay with him, to make it forever. Claire looked up at him, her hazel eyes bright with tears. She said yes, her voice firm despite the chaos. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment, but Claire only saw Dan, his face a promise she wanted to keep. They left the gala together, stepping into the cool Chicago night. Claire clutched her award, her hand in Dan's. She felt lighter, the weight of the past lifting with each step. Tyler, Rachel, and Jake were gone, their schemes undone. Claire knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with Dan beside her she felt ready. The city stretched out before them, alive with possibility, and for the first time, Claire believed she belonged in its light. Claire Donovan stood in the warm glow of Dorothy Reynolds' cozy brownstone, a few miles from Chicago's bustling downtown. It was Daniel Reynolds' birthday, a quiet affair Dorothy had insisted on hosting. The living room smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, a cake cooling on the counter. Claire adjusted the gift bag in her hands, her heart fluttering with a mix of nerves and excitement. After the gala, she and Dan had stepped into something new, their paper marriage turning real. Tonight felt like a milestone, a chance to settle into this unexpected life. Dorothy bustled around, her silver hair catching the light as she set out plates. She had welcomed Claire like family from the start, her sharp eyes softening whenever they talked. Claire liked her, the way she balanced warmth with a no-nonsense edge. Dorothy called Dan over, her voice carrying a playful scold as she told him to stop working for once. Dan emerged from the hall, his usual suit swapped for a sweater, his dark hair slightly mussed. He smiled at Claire, a small, private smile that made her stomach flip. She still could not believe this man, this CEO, was hers. The evening unfolded with easy chatter. Dorothy pulled out old photo albums, showing Claire snapshots of Dan as a kid, all gap-toothed grins and messy hair. Claire laughed, teasing him about a picture where he clutched a Lego spaceship. Dan rolled his eyes, but his grin betrayed him. He said he had loved building things back then, a habit he never quite outgrew. Claire filed that away, glad she had picked the right gift. Dorothy watched them, her smile wide, and said they made a good pair. Claire blushed, her hand brushing Dan's under the table. Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, comfort food that reminded Claire of home. She helped Dorothy clear the plates, the older woman patting her arm as they worked. Dorothy said she had known Claire was special the moment she read her application, that she had a spark Dan needed. Claire smiled, grateful for the faith Dorothy had shown her. Back in the living room, Dan cut the cake, passing Claire a slice. Their fingers touched and she felt that familiar warmth, a quiet connection growing stronger each day. After dessert, Claire handed Dan her gift, a sturdy box wrapped in plain brown paper. He raised an eyebrow, peeling it open to reveal a Lego set, a sleek car model with hundreds of pieces. His face lit up, a boyish grin breaking through his usual calm. He asked how she knew, and Claire said Dorothy's photos had given her the idea. She added that he worked too hard, that this might give him a break. Dan laughed, a sound Claire rarely heard, and said she was right. He opened the box, spilling pieces onto the coffee table, and asked her to help him build it. Claire agreed, settling beside him. They worked together, hands brushing as they snapped bricks into place. Dorothy watched from an armchair, her eyes twinkling. She said it was about time Dan had someone to share his quiet nights, that Claire brought light to their family. Claire smiled, her cheeks warm, and focused on the Lego, her fingers steady. The car took shape, sleek and black, a small triumph they built piece by piece. Dan leaned back when they finished, his shoulder against hers. He said it was the best gift he had gotten in years, his voice soft. Claire felt a swell of joy, knowing she had reached him. Later, Dorothy pulled Claire aside, pressing a small bouquet into her hands. It was the same one Dan had ordered for the gala, roses and lilies tied with a ribbon. Dorothy said he had meant to give it to her that night, but the chaos got in the way. She added with a wink that it was for his wife, always had been. Claire's breath caught, her fingers tracing the petals. She looked at Dan, chatting with Dorothy now, and felt a rush of certainty. This was real, not just a contract anymore. She thanked Dorothy, her voice thick, and tucked the flowers close. The night wound down, and Dorothy shooed them out, saying she needed her rest. Claire and Dan stepped onto the brownstones' porch, the city air cool against their skin. He offered to drive her home, but Claire shook her head, saying she wanted to walk with him a while. They strolled through the quiet streets, the skyline glowing in the distance. Claire broke the silence, her voice steady as she said she had been thinking about work. She told him she had submitted her resignation that morning, that she wanted to find her own path now. Dan stopped, his brow furrowing, and asked why. Claire explained, her words careful. She said Reynolds Tech had given her everything, a chance to rise when she had nothing, but she felt ready to step out, to chase a dream she had not named yet. She added that she owed him more than she could repay, that he had changed her life. Dan listened, his face softening. He said the company would miss her, that he would miss her, but he understood. He asked what she would do, and Claire smiled, saying she might start small, maybe a non-profit for kids like the ones in Appalachia. Dan nodded, his eyes bright with pride. They reached a small park, the city lights reflecting off a fountain. Dan stopped, turning to face her. He said he had one more thing to give her, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It was their marriage license, the one they had signed a year ago. He said their deal was up, that they could end it if she wanted. Claire looked at it, then at him, her heart racing. She said she did not want to end it, that she wanted forever instead. Dan's face broke into a smile, wide and unguarded. He pulled her close, his arms strong around her, and said he wanted that too. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming around them. Claire felt his heartbeat against hers, steady and sure. She thought of the gala, his voice calling her his wife, the way he had fought for her. She thought of that night at his penthouse, the trust she had felt even in her haze. Dan tilted her chin up, his blue eyes searching hers. He said he liked her, really liked her, and was glad it was not a secret anymore. Claire laughed, soft and free, and said she liked him too. They kissed, slow and sweet, the world fading away. The walk ended at Claire's apartment, but Dan followed her up. They stepped onto her tiny balcony, the Chicago skyline stretching before them. Claire leaned against the railing, the bouquet still in her hands. Dan stood beside her, his arm around her waist. She looked out at the city, its lights a promise of new beginnings. She had started with nothing, a desperate deal to save her mother. Now she had Dan, a love she never expected. He whispered that they would figure it out together, whatever came next. Claire nodded, her voice firm as she agreed. The night settled around them, calm and clear. Claire felt a peace she had not known before, a sense that she belonged, not just to this city, but to him. Their story had begun with a contract, a cold exchange in a coffee shop, but it ended here, on this balcony, with a love built from trust and time. She rested her head on his shoulder, the skyline glowing, and knew this was only the start.